Welcome to the Pat White Show. Well, the United States Supreme Court just issued what I believe their final ruling for the year 2025, where they go on vacation and do whatever justices do. But this is a big one they came out with. I may not seem like a big one to you, but trust me, when it comes to running the country, this is a pretty big decision. It seems that a lot of federal judges around the United States have been issuing what are known as universal injunctions. So if they don't like something that a president said, sets a policy, was an executive decision or whatever within his powers, a federal judge can say, nope, you can't do that, and I'm issuing a universal injunction that stops you from doing whatever it is that you're wanting to do. Well, obviously, this is happening all around the United States, and it has to do with all sorts of different issues that came up. The biggest one of which, and the president talked about the birthright, whether people not born here are necessarily citizens, and who is a citizen and who's not, birthright rules, okay? This was not decided by them. This was some other stuff involving universal injunctions. The court, by a margin of 6-3, said, judges, you federal judges out there, you cannot issue universal injunctions unless they're very, very specific in what they do and who you're representing. And what they're saying is, look, if you want to do something universally, you pretty much have to do it by what is known as a class action case, where you get a whole lot of people affected, and that whole lot of people, that's representing one group of the entire United States, so you can make a judgment there. But an individual case, federal judges, you don't have that authority. Now, this all goes back to the Judiciary Act of 1789. This is where Congress ends up appointing federal judges. And there are federal judges in every state. No, there's numerous of them. And they have federal powers. They're elected for life. But they only are supposed to work on things directly one person versus one person in a situation and remedy that on a federal basis. Not supposed to be saying, hey, the entire United States, you have to follow my order, which is essentially what a lot of them were doing. So this all came down to being argued in the Supreme Court, whether federal judges have the authority to issue a declaration that affects everyone in the United States. So let's say a federal judge in Oregon makes a decision, says this is a universal decision. My judgment in Oregon affects everybody in the U.S. Well, I may live in Indiana. I'm saying, wait a minute, that judge is telling me what I can do in the state of Indiana, and he or she is in Oregon? It's kind of what it came down to, folks. Now, that's what the Supreme Court does. They affect something that affects everybody. But a federal judge has limitations. Limitations as to where the area that they serve. They're supposed to work on problems within that area and deal with that area specifically, one-on-one, this person suing that person. Solve that issue at a local level. So, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who's kind of probably one of the youngest ones of the Supreme Court, wrote the entire decision. She said, now look, we're not dealing with the birth citizenship situation. We're not dealing with that. So we're dealing with what the judges are doing, trying to issue these universal declarations, and they have been doing them in loads in the Trump administration. Every federal judge that doesn't like Trump or doesn't like what decision he's making, they issue their own declaration saying, we don't care. We're going to tell the entire nation that no, Trump can't do this. Well, the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. So maybe that has shut that down for the time being. But will the Supreme Court still be involved in some big things? Yes, they will. But right now, the birthright citizenship situation, the executive order that he wrote, that was not included in this particular decision. Not. And the three justices that went against the 6-3 decision, that was Sotomayor, Kagan, and Brown-Jackson rather. They all dissented and said, nope, we don't agree. So now you have it. Supreme Court has finished up this year's by saying, judges, you do not have the right to issue universal injunctions unless it's some very, very specific cases, not what you've been doing lately. You just can't do that. One down, well, many down, I guess, and many more to come. So right now, Trump has won another very big victory in the United States because federal judges cannot exceed their authority, according to the United States Supreme Court. And now, you know. So does anyone remember the movie A Few Good Men? Tom Cruise, Jack Nicholson, courthouse drama? Well, the biggest part of the movie, and the part that everybody seems to remember, is when Tom Cruise was yelling, "I want the truth." And Jack Nicholson, with a real snarl in his face, goes, "You can't handle the truth." Well, I'm going to give you the truth about the WNBA. It's really not the WNBA, it's the alphabet NBA. Alphabet meaning LBGQT, whatever the numbers are, whatever the letters are. That's the WNBA. It's the LGBTQT league. Has been since the start. Mostly it's happens to be for black and white female lesbians. It's been the way the league's been. Now, the way it started out was every team had 12 players. The NBA gave each team $1 million for the players. Works out about $76,000 per player per year. That's why they're getting 76 grand. Divided $1 million by 12, there's your number. Now, and you got the coaches to pay for, the rest of the team to pay for, the trainers, what have you. Traditionally, the WNBA has been losing roughly $40 million a year. It's been the way it's been. They play in venues, 3,000 to 4,000 people. Nobody cares. You know, a few folks that show up, the drag queens show up, whatever. But that was their world. That was their fine and dandy world. They were happy with it. Well, then along comes this young lady. Her name is Caitlin Clark. She comes in the league last year, number one choice. Indianapolis gets her. She comes in and she's an ice princess. She's a star. She's a one of a kind. She's along the lines of maybe a Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, even a Pete Maravich, if you want to go back that far. She's one of those special kinds that changes the league. Kobe Bryant, any of those kind of folks. Steph Curry, I'll mention that one too. So a game changer. She comes in the first year of the league, trying to do things. She's popping things all over the place. Team comes in and actually makes it into the playoffs, surprisingly enough. Gets bounced out pretty easy. But the second year, they get a new coach. Bring in a coach by the name of Stephanie White. Well, Stephanie White's got her own issues going on. But Stephanie White decided to bring in the players that she wanted that would fit around Caitlin Clark for a team. Problem was, they weren't really fitting well with Caitlin Clark. She was getting along, but it wasn't quite right. And nothing was more obvious than when the folks that came along, Lexi Hall and Stephanie Cunningham. Those two ladies came along. You may have seen this. Stephanie Cunningham came out with this shirt. Have you seen the shirt? Tres leches. Now, that means 3 milks. But what color is milk? Milk is white. 3 white women in a league traditionally, predominantly black female lesbians. That's what it was, folks. Whether you like it or not, that's the truth. So you get these 3 ladies who, by the way, all are straight as near as I can understand. And but even Stephanie White apparently is, well, she's part of the LBGQT, whatever the group they are. She's one of them, as they say. She was gone for a couple of games, whatever, had some personal to do. Apparently her girlfriend's mother or her wife's mother or whatever it is was sick and she was off. And another young lady on the team, I think her name was Dewana. She was playing and then suddenly she wasn't and they brought her in. She was supposed to be some 15-time All-Star, been around a long time. And suddenly she was disappeared. Wasn't playing. Went for what, 6, 7 games. Disappeared. Well, as it turns out, she said, I don't want to play with this team anymore. Because she wanted to leave the team because her wife plays for the Phoenix Spark, or the Phoenix Mercury. I'm sorry, Phoenix Mercury. Her wife plays for Phoenix Mercury, and she doesn't want to be in Indy. And the only reason she was in Indy is because she was getting a $200,000 paycheck over the regular $76,000 they normally got. So ultimately, they put her out there to see if they could trade her. Couldn't find anybody. Put her on waivers, and she has now gone into the waiver wire. But here's something that came out today. Waiver wire's got a note on it that says, do not pick this player up because she only wants to play for Phoenix, which is where her wife is. All right, the problem with Phoenix is they want to put her on the squad with her wife. Then they have to cut somebody off the team because you're only allowed 12 players. Somebody gets cut. Now, Indianapolis loses Duana, and so they pick up another lady that had working with him on a 10-day hardship deal. Pretty good player. We'll see what happens on what she does. But here's the biggest news that you need to know. It was just announced that Caitlin Clark is injured again. This time it's a groin injury. Now, if a guy gets a groin injury, that could be out for a pretty long time. That's all I'm telling you. A woman, I'm not sure. They say maybe one game. She's scheduled for one game. She's supposed to be off against the LA Sparks. But apparently she got this injury when she was hurt in the game against Seattle. And she ended up falling or hitting herself, and you could tell something wasn't right. Something wasn't right. But Caitlin Clark recently has had a problem. At that Seattle game, she was 3 for 13 in the field. 3 for 13? And she was 0 for 6 at three-point line. She was hitting clankers. Something ain't right, folks. Something ain't right. And for the last 3 road games, she's been 1 for 23. Not good. Not good at all. So, what's going to happen? I'll tell you right now, the league has got some big problems because, let's be honest, there's people in the league that don't want Caitlin Clark in there because she's straight and she's white. Now she's got a couple of friends, Sophie Cunningham and Lexi Hull, and they're the Tres Leches. So Caitlin Clark's going to be out, maybe for a game, maybe for more. We don't know. But I'll tell you what's happened with the WNBA. Suddenly, a lot of straight people got interested in the game. They went from 3,000-4,000 people in a tiny gymnasium to 17,000 to 20,000 in major stadiums. And it was families, it was moms, dads, it was kids, all standing out there to get autographs. So the straight people were invading a world that traditionally had been left to the gay folks. That's the truth. I may not like it, but that's exactly what's going on. It's unfortunate. Will it change? I don't know. Will Caitlin Clark and the young ladies coming in now, who majority of them tend to be straight, will they change things in the currently gay WNBA, or as we call it, the alphabet WNBA? I don't know. Unless they get things fixed, folks, it is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. And if it gets worse, they're going to lose an audience. And that audience, they can't afford to lose. Well, on the 27th day of June, the United States Supreme Court issued their final ruling of the year. And this one was a pretty big one because it dealt with the authority federal judges have in the United States. Here in the U.S., we've got 70-some federal judges. They're appointed for life, and they're all over the United States. And what a number of them have been doing in the second term of Donald Trump is issuing universal injunctions. Now, these universal injunctions, according to these federal judges, cover the entire United States. And so what a federal judge is doing is essentially making national law. The United States Supreme Court took a look at this and said, gentlemen and ladies, stay in your lane. That's none of your business. Your job is as a federal district court judge. That's important, the word district. You work on things in your district. And you got a plaintiff, you got a defendant. They got an issue, you solve that issue. Now, if you want to get into national stuff, what you're going to have to do is have a class action suit. And that means you got a bunch of people together, all saying something involving the entire United States that affects all of them. But no, the Supreme Court said by a vote of 6-3, federal district judges, stay in your lane. Don't be telling the national, the president, if you will, how he can run his country and what he can do with his authority. So that's where it stands. But here's the big thing. It had to do with a executive order that Trump wrote back in January 2025. The order number was 14160. And this was the birthright situation. And this is going to be a big thing coming up in October because it deals with the 14th Amendment that says that, hey, if you're born here, you're a citizen. Now, here's what the 14th Amendment says. You can plainly read it, but you have to understand there's some words there that need to be clarified. The fact that you were born here isn't necessarily the case, and let me tell you why. You're going to learn about this in a second. It's where you're beholden to. It's who you are essentially tied to. So if someone comes up from Mexico, they're not necessarily tied to the United States. They're tied to Mexico because that's where they're from. They're a citizen of Mexico, and that's where they're from. Now, the 14th Amendment was drafted clear back in 1868. It was right after the Civil War, and the whole purpose of the amendment, according to the person who wrote it, was to make sure the slaves were made citizens. Because they were brought to the United States, they had kids. They said, no, they have to be citizens, free slaves. And that 14th Amendment has been the basis for a whole lot of litigation over the years. Brown v. Board of Education, Loving versus Virginia, that's on the interracial marriage thing. Roe v. Wade, the abortion situation. Bush v. Gore, 2000, it's the voting situation. Obergefell-Hodges, back in 2015, that's on same-sex marriages. 14th Amendment has been litigated a lot. But here's something you have to understand. Is everybody born in the United States automatically a citizen? Well, here's something you to think about. How about Indians on the reservation? Did you know that Indians were not U.S. citizens, even though they were born in America, probably been here a lot longer than any American, if you will? They were not considered citizens until 1924. Because you see, Indians lived on reservations. Those weren't controlled by the federal government. They controlled their own society, their own area. And because of that, the federal government said they're not U.S. citizens. There was a law passed in 1924, the Indian Reservation Act, that literally said, okay, Indians are officially citizens. So 1924, they weren't citizens. Now, let's say you got people come here, ambassadors. Let's use those in particular. Let's say somebody from England comes here as an ambassador, and she has a child when she's here. Do you know that under U.S. law, that child is not a U.S. citizen? Even though this child was born in the United States, they're not a citizen. Because right now they say, no, foreign diplomats, their kids are not citizens. You have to understand the consequence here of the where you belong, who you belong to, who you're beholden to. This is what's going to be the argument coming up in October when the U.S. Supreme Court reconvenes, and this is going to be the big decision. And I can tell you right now, the birthright citizenship argument, that is going to be a huge issue. Because if two illegals come to the United States, have a child, mother and father, saying, well, that child born here is automatically a citizen, that's going to be challenged. That is being challenged. The Trump Executive Order 14160 says just because you're here illegally doesn't mean that child is automatically a citizen. And now the Supreme Court is going to take a look at the wording of that 14th Amendment and having to look at, there's a line in there about who you're beholden to. Now think about that. Who are you beholden to? Because remember, American Indians were not considered citizens in the United States, even though they've been here for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. It wasn't until the Congress passed a law that said they were. So now you understand a little bit more. Federal judges can no longer stick their nose in places their nose don't belong. But the courts are going to take a look at this come October. Who is really a citizen and who's not? Is it automatic? or do you have to be a legal citizen, a registered person in the United States, an actual citizen, or having a legal right to be here before that child is a citizen? It's going to be debated, folks. It's going to be hot debate, and we're going to see what happens. But none of this is going to happen until October, on the first Monday in October when the Supreme Court comes back online. But now you understand the 14th Amendment is still up in the air, and it will be litigated once again. And it all happens this fall. And now you know. Well, if you've been watching local television news lately, you've probably seen a big battle going on between the chief of the fire department for the city of Allen County and the union, Fort Wayne Fire Department Local 124. That's the union. And here's the big problem going on. They're yelling and screaming and hollering at each other. And apparently the union took a vote of their members and said, do you want to keep the fire chief? His name is Ken Leahy, I believe it. Eric Leahy. Eric Leahy. You want to keep Eric Leahy as the fire chief, who's been around since, 2012, how long he's been the chief? Somewhere in that 2012, 2014. Okay, those are numbers. And do you want to keep him or not? Well, 95% of the firefighters who were participating in this survey, not all did, some did not. 95% of those who participated said, no, we want him out. What's the beef going on between the Fort Wayne Fire Department union and the city of Fort Wayne? Well, they recently had a lady on TV. Her name was Amy Gibbs. Amy used to be the fire chief herself before Mr. Leahy took over. She was fire chief under Tom Henry. And then she was an EMT, and then she was in HR, and I don't know what her job was there. But anyway, she was fire chief. And she's saying, well, there's a problem going on. There's issues that need to be addressed. I'm going, yada, yada, yada. Okay, fine. What are the problems? Well, apparently the fire department union, the folks here in Fort Wayne, are saying, hey, we don't like the fact that you're sending out fire units, a fire truck with 3 people instead of 4. You're supposed to have 4 people on the truck, and you're sending out 3. Or you don't have enough firefighters, and you have to call off some of the rigs. And then a report was done saying, well, if that's all the problem, here's the timing for people to respond to timing. In 2020, the time was 3 minutes and 20 seconds, not 2020. 2024, the time to respond was 3 minutes and 18 seconds. And thus far in 2025, the time to respond for firefighters is now 3:15. Well, that doesn't square with them saying that we got people off duty and people aren't, we don't have enough people on the trucks. Something doesn't sound right there, folks. Not working for me. Well, they're saying, well, you got 3 people on a truck and we don't like that. We want to have 4. And then there's the other thing they're complaining about. Firefighters are getting too much overtime. Now, overtime costs the city of Fort Wayne money. Let's be honest. You got to pay time and a half for someone who's working as a fireman and he has to work past his normal scheduled time. He gets over 40 hours, he's getting time and a half. Well, they're saying that's because there aren't enough firefighters on the staff. And the chief Leahy went on TV and said, hey, back 10 years ago, we had 350 firefighters. Today, we have 350 firefighters. And a new class is coming out, and there's going to be 20 firefighters, and we'll up to 370. To which the former chief, Amy Gibbs, said, well, he's not taking into account that a bunch of firefighters are going to be retiring. And yes, firefighters do retire. I understand that. And is the number going to jump to 370 with firefighters retiring? Probably not. So where's the firefighters going to be fighting? Well, according to the chief, and take a look at this, he said this is all about the union contract. Everything we're fighting over, everything we're arguing over, take a listen. This is what he said. You see it right there. Said this is related to the union contract. So apparently a union contract is coming up and everybody wants to get their say in and make their big points and try to convince the public, you and me, that whose side you're on. Well, you're on this guy's side, you're on that guy's side. And yes, the city of Fort Wayne has grown, and yes, we have more fire departments. So do we need essentially more people? Yep, maybe we do. But that's up to city council to authorize how many we're going to have as permanent firefighters. They know people retire. They understand that. Is it going to be actually 370? Probably not. So, do we need to have more permanent firefighters so there's less overtime for firefighters? It's maybe something worth consideration. But firing the fire chief because we don't like his policies, sorry. Now you know what's going on, folks. The battle is basically about a potential union contract. And in my opinion, everybody's arguing their side, see where they fit and what they can convince and whom they can convince. And those whoms are you. They're trying to say, we need more, give us more, we want more. Nothing unusual there. Everybody's in it for something. And this is how the game is being played, and you're seeing it played out in front of your very eyes. Well, here's a topic I didn't think I'd be getting into, but apparently a whole bunch of people in the sporting world and the entertainment world have sent a letter to Donald Trump saying, it's time for you to change your cannabis reform. What that means is what they're saying is, hey, Prez, you need to make weed legal. All right, you're not going to believe this, but here's some of the names on this letter. Mike Tyson, NBA stars Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, big star. NBA star Allen Iverson, Roy Jones, Dallas Cowboys star Des Bryant, NFL star Antonio Brown, NFL players, and a whole bunch of other folks, including the likes of Steven Jackson, Chris Webber, J.R. Smith, John Sally, Champ Bailey, Marvin Washington, Tony Richardson, all signed this letter to the president saying, hey, you need to take marijuana off of Schedule 1 and put it onto Schedule 3 at the very least. Schedule 1 is for things like heroin, that kind of bad stuff, really bad stuff. You know, there used to be an old movie years and years ago, I think it was in the 30s or 40s, called Reefer Madness. I remember that movie. I remember seeing it where you smoke dope, you go crazy or something to that effect. Well, apparently the DEA has decided a long time ago, that marijuana was a Schedule 1 drug. Well, now 47 states, I mean, believe it or not, 47 states around America are saying, nah, it's not really that bad. As a matter of fact, the business alone of marijuana in the United States, I didn't know this, $35 billion a year spent on cannabis. And it turns out, and here's something else I didn't know, people over the age of 65, since 2021, the use of marijuana by people over the age of 65 has jumped 46%. Now, why are people over the age of 65 doing weed? Well, I guess that's what they kind of did back in the 60s. You know, I mean, I understand that. But what they did back in the 60s is ditchweed compared to what they have today. The amount of tetrahydrocannabinol, THC as it's called, in today's marijuana they sell apparently is a whole bunch more powerful than it was back in the 1960s when you were smoking whatever you can find. But apparently elderly people are doing it. They're going out there and hitting on a blunt. Now, there's an old joke. It says if you get 5 people together and they're drinking, a fight's going to break out. Put 5 people together smoking marijuana, they're going to start a band. Don't know about that, but a certain amount of logic to it when you think about it. So, should Donald Trump start thinking about saying, hey, we need to move marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3? See, there's another problem. You realize that the marijuana companies, people like that, can't use any tax breaks. When you file for taxes, you say, well, I'm a marijuana dealer. Apparently, you're going to have some trouble. Plus, and this one really is a bothersome one, the marijuana people in business, the medical marijuana shops and those kind of things, you see them up in Michigan and now over in Ohio and frankly, every other state around us is selling this stuff. They can't use banks. They can't go to a bank because banks aren't going to work with them because banks are federally controlled. So it's all a cash business. And to me, that's kind of dangerous when you think about it because the bad guys are saying, hey, they're dealing in nothing but cash. Let's go over there. Or else, you can't use your credit card. I guess you're going to buy medical marijuana. I don't think you can. I don't know. I'm guessing you can't use your credit card to buy your medical marijuana if you go to Michigan. You go to Ohio. You go to anywhere around the United States. Don't know. But is it time the United States change their laws on medical marijuana, on marijuana as a whole, and move it from Class 3 to a Class from a class 1 to a class 3. I don't know. I'm still torn on this one, folks, because my concern is people driving high. That's the biggest issue I have. You know, when people who are drinking, we've got tests. You blow the test, blow the minimum, 0.08, whatever. We got instruments to test you on that in the highway. Currently, there's no instrument available to test you for, smoking dope when you get pulled over. I mean, yeah, they can look in your eyes or you're slurring or whatever. Who knows? I don't know. Fortunately, I have never been in that case. Don't want to be either. But until they get something that says that they can get people off the road who are driving under the influence of drugs, I'm not really in favor of changing certain laws. I understand what these guys are saying. Apparently, they are older, they got medical issues, they smoke dope. All right, that's their call. But you have to be cautious about certain things. President now is going to take a look at this and decide whether marijuana should be changed from a class 1 to a schedule 3, making it, well, sort of still illegal, but not really all that big a deal. America, are we smoking more dope than we used to? And are old people getting buzzes on? I wasn't aware of that. But apparently, according to the Medical Association, they said from 2021 to 2023, the number of people over the age of 65 toking on weed has gone up 46%. Is that what Americans are doing when they reach old age? Hey, honey, light me up one. Woo! News to me, folks. Totally news to me. So are you one of the many people watching the trial of Sean P. Diddy or P. Diddy Combs or whatever he calls himself? Trial's been going on in New York for, almost 8 weeks. And they have brought him up on a number of charges. And I mean, all kinds of charges from arson to sex trafficking to, heaven knows what else they've charged him with. They've had a ton of witnesses up there saying he did this and he did that. Well, finally, the prosecution rested. And then it was the defense turn. Except the defense didn't put up any witnesses whatsoever, didn't say anything. Just went up and said, Your Honor, the defense rests. So the prosecution spent their 8 weeks putting people on trial and putting all these witnesses up there. And then defense said, P. Diddy, he ain't taking the stand. We rest. So over the weekend, the judge has to get ready and told the jurors, hey, be ready on Monday morning. You're going to start deliberations after I read you the charges and what you can do and how you can react and what things you can find guilty and, all the other legal crap that judges have to do. All right. So during that time, if you haven't figured it out, the prosecution just dropped. Now pay attention here. This is important. The prosecution just dropped a number of charges they had spent the last 6-8 weeks trying to prove against P. Diddy, and they've dropped them. Now you say, wait a minute, why'd they drop the charges? Well, they were charges of kidnapping, abetting, sex trafficking, even attempted arson. Those are ones that got to put him away for life. And they just said, well, it'll be too confusing for the jury. If they have all of those charges, they've got to take a look at one charge at a time, and it'll be too confusing and too much effort for the jury. So the judge has got to instruct the jury saying, yeah, you remember all that 8 weeks of testimony was given on all these charges? Well, the prosecution has decided that they're dropping those charges. So the only ones we have left are like racketeering and those kind of things. Those are life charges too. So anyway, well, if I'm sitting in the jury, I'm going, what do you mean they dropped them? You mean it didn't happen? They couldn't prove him? He didn't do it? Only left the last couple of charges here? Well, how do we know he's even guilty of those charges or anything else they dropped? Good question. Very good question, because we don't know. I don't know what the jury's thinking. I can't tell you because I'm not a juror. But I can tell you this. Dropping the kidnapping, the abetting sex trafficking, and the attempted murder charges, those were, lifelong charges. He could have got life in prison for those things. But then saying to the jury, hey, we dropped a whole bunch of charges. You only got a few left. You can pick on those, and you could probably come to an agreement on those. Folks, I hate to say this, but as much as I see it, we could be running into another OJ trial. I know that was clear back in 1994. None of you remember it. Many of you weren't even alive. But it seems to me you're giving that jury just enough reason to say, nah, we got doubt. We ain't going to do it. He's one of us, so we're not going to convict him. Because you don't know the makeup of a jury, and neither do I. But if they decide, well, there are only a couple of charges left, and we don't like that, we think something's not going on here, we think you're not being a good prosecutor, we're going to find him innocent of everything, and P. Diddy could be walking free. Don't know. Like I said, jury deliberations are coming up starting, well, this week when the judge tells them, here are the charges, here's the stuff you can try them on. Is it going to work out like an OJ trial did? I don't know. But I'm having some serious issues. And that also brings me to something else. You know who the lead attorney was on this trial? James Comey's daughter. She's a New York attorney. She was the one put in charge of prosecuting this trial, and she was the one who decided to drop charges. Someone want to tell me why? I'm just a little bit confused, folks. But there you go, folks. If you didn't understand it, the prosecution has dropped a number of charges, and come when the jury gets together on Monday and read the charges, they're going to be told the prosecution dropped a whole bunch of charges. These are the ones left. Decide on these. That's the plan, folks. Will it work out? I have no way of knowing. But now, if you follow the P. Diddy trial, now you know what could happen. And it could be a repeat of what happened to O.J. Simpson in 1994. And wouldn't that be something to go, whoa, about? So did you ever wonder what our state legislature does down there for the money we're paying them and the time they spend? Well, I've got a list of 11 new laws that the state of Indiana has enacted. These go into effect on July the 1st. First one has to do with members of the elite, namely our state officials, elected officials, what kind of cars they could buy on your dime. Well, a couple of them tried to buy some very fancy cars. Secretary of State tried to get himself a $90,000 Denali, and the lieutenant governor tried to get himself an $88,000 Chevy Tahoe Country. Can't do it anymore. You want to get a standard vehicle like a standard Chevy or a standard Toyota or a standard Kia? Fine. Nothing fancy. That's new law. New thing. Down in Indianapolis, it used to be if driving on 465, which is the loop that goes around Indy, speed limit was 55 miles an hour. This is a speed trap, folks. Nobody drives 55. Of course, here up in Fort Wayne, nobody bothers to follow any speed limit from my observation. But down in Indy, 465 was 55 miles an hour posted. Well, now they changed the law. It's now 65. Not that I think anybody's down there is going to drive 65 because they aren't going to. But at least they changed the law. Also, new law, no transgender athletes in the state of Indiana playing on girls' teams. Now, the NCAA says there's only 10 in America. That's fine. None are in Indiana, and none are going to be in Indiana. No transgender athletes playing on girls' teams. Fine by me. Also, for those areas of Indiana where the sheriff doesn't want to report illegals in their jails, new law says you got to report them, sheriff. Going to have to tell the feds, the ICE folks, I got an illegal in here. It needs to be taken care of. Now they have to report it whether they want to or not. It goes into effect July the 1st. All right, here's one you don't hear much about, lab-grown meat. Well, they're working on lab-grown animals. They take the stem cells and make it into something that looks like meat. They try to do that in the state of Indiana. Got a new law that says, got to have a label on it. Says, this is imitation meat. New law, probably not a bad plan. Now, let's say you're running for school board. You used to be running for the school board. You didn't put your name on the ballot of what your party affiliation was, Republican, Democrat, whatever you were. Didn't have that on there for elections, so people didn't know if you were one side, the other side, whatever. Well, now the legislature says you can declare your name and your party. So people voting, you're the Republican or Democrat, they will now know when they're putting someone on the school board. Now, you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but do it at your own peril. And by the way, if you vote straight ticket in an election, school board is not included in that straight ticket. You got to look at the individuals themselves. Also, this involves intoxicated minors. There was a law done about 12, 13 years ago that says if a kid sees another kid who's intoxicated and calls for help for the kid because he's drunk, Well, that kid who called the police, he's fine. He's immune. He's not going to be charged with anything. But the kid who's drunk or whatever, he can still be charged. Well, they changed the state law. Both kids are now immune. That goes into effect on July the 1st. Now, here's the other things they've done. A couple other small things, but they're not really small. State of Indiana says no more funding for PBS or NPR, public broadcasting. No more taxpayer dollars for that. They want to do, they go on the street and sell their advertising just like the regular radio TV stations do. No more taxpayer dollars for public broadcasting and NPR. And finally, what they're going to do is to say, how about eliminating degrees in colleges that are ridiculous and they only have 2 or 3 graduates a year for a college. Let's say you have a degree in stupidity. Now, some would say most colleges are putting those degrees out now. Well, probably not. But if you have a degree in an obscure thing, gender studies, let's say, and you're only graduating 2 people a year, you're not going to have those courses anymore. That's going to be eliminated by state law. So there you go. Those are some of the laws that are changing effective July the 1st. Not very far away, folks, but get ready because the laws are changing, and it goes to show you what they're doing down in Indianapolis is voting on things. You may not agree with everything they vote on, but at least they're doing something because you're paying for it.